When we speak of the last goodbye, what we are really talking about is the moment the narcissist can no longer keep up their belief of being in charge. For years, maybe even decades, the whole relationship has turned around one specific way of acting. Power, not always power in the clear sense, like telling you every action or choice, though that often takes place. It is much deeper. It is mind control, the feeling that they are the main focus, that your feelings and ideas move only because of them. The narcissist lives because of this setup. They get energy from it. When you speak a real final goodbye, when you break the cycle of confusion and pull away fully, that whole system falls apart. You must grasp something about people who live in this way. Their sense of who they are is not built on anything strong. A healthy person, even when faced with being turned away or left alone, has some inner structure to depend on an inside frame of values, aims, or connections that can hold them up during times of loss. The narcissist does not have this. Their self is put together like a house of mirrors, always sending back the reflection of attention and praise from others. Remove those reflections and the house breaks down. The final goodbye is not just painful to them, it threatens their very existence. It feels like death because the person they have pretended to be cannot live without someone else noticing it. And this is why the loss of power is so scary. Power is not just a plan for them, it is their lifeline. The connection itself is never really about caring or love. It is about tying you into their world. That tie allows them to feel real, but when the tie is broken, when you step away and refuse to be pulled back, they're left alone with themselves, and that is precisely what they cannot stand. They cannot stand themselves. They cannot sit with the emptiness that is left when the game ends. Now, it is important to note that not all goodbyes cause this breakdown in the same way. Many times people leave, but still stay caught up emotionally, still arguing, still answering, still reacting. The narcissist gets stronger from that because even anger is a type of link. But the real goodbye, the one where you fully separate, removes even that. And this is why it is different. It cuts the last thread, the quietness, the absence, the refusal to be pulled back into the cycle. That is what deals the deadly blow to their feeling of power. You could see it almost like a hunter that suddenly finds its target gone. The hunter does not simply move on as if nothing happened. It struggles wildly. It becomes frantic because its survival depends on the hunt. In the same way, the narcissist's sense of self depends on you taking part in their drama. When that drama stops, they are left exposed. It is not just that they lose you, it is that they lose the framework that made them feel strong, important, alive. This collapse often comes with an almost dramatic show of feelings, rage, denial, a wish for revenge, or even sudden begging. But if you look closely, you see the same basic desperation. They cannot accept the fact of losing control because it is not just the relationship they have lost. It is their whole structure of being. The final goodbye makes this truth clear. It removes the false idea that they were ever truly in charge. And here is the strange twist. The very thing they fight hardest to keep power is the very thing they lose the moment you walk away for good. In their frantic efforts to hold on, they show just how weak they are. It is not strength that drives their actions, but weakness hidden as dominance. The final goodbye reveals this. So when the game is finished, when the last move has been made, and the final goodbye is real, the narcissist does not simply feel sadness or anger. They feel destroyed. They feel the falling apart of a carefully built world in which they ruled at the center. That is why they fight it so fiercely and why they cannot stand to let it end. The truth is, the loss of power is not only their biggest fear, it is their sure fate. Because no false idea, no matter how detailed, can keep itself going forever. And when it breaks down, when you finally step away, you reveal the deepest truth of all. Their power was never real. The loss of power is not just the end of a connection, it is the end of their false idea. And in that moment, you become free, and they are left to face the one enemy they cannot beat, themselves. When you get to the point of a final goodbye with a narcissist, one of the first things you notice is not just the collapse of their power, but the outburst of rage that follows. It is important to know that this narcissistic rage is not normal anger. Normal anger is usually balanced. It comes up when someone feels hurt or treated unfairly, and it can often be expressed, settled, and forgotten. Narcissistic rage, on the other hand, is a deep, sudden burst. It comes from a place much deeper and darker. It is the reaction of a person whose shaky sense of self has been threatened at its core. What makes this rage so intense is that the narcissist sees your goodbye as more than just rejection. To them, it is an act of betrayal. And betrayal for the narcissist is not simply hurtful, it cannot be endured. It shatters their belief of being better and lasting forever. They thought they were vital, that they were the center of gravity around which you moved. When you walk away, you prove that this was never true. And instead of facing that reality, they strike out with fury. Now, why is this rage so easy to predict? Because for the narcissist, dealing with emotions has never been learned in a mature way. In childhood, many narcissists learn to handle feelings of shame, being left, or unimportant by building a false self, an over the top image of confidence and importance. This false self becomes their shield. But when the final goodbye pierces that shield, the old hurts they have been guarding break out to the surface. Rage is their defense. It is their way of turning away the unbearable truth that they are not in control and that their grand image was a trick all along. This is why the rage can take on so many forms. Sometimes it is explosive screaming, insults, threats. Sometimes it is cold and planned, silent treatments, bad talk about you to others, tries to turn people against you, and sometimes it is wrapped in being the victim, where they claim they're the one who has been wronged, stirring up pity to hide their fury. All of these reactions come from the same place. They cannot stand the fact that you are no longer willing to feed their story. What is especially clear is how unbalanced this rage often seems. From an outsider's view, you might wonder, why does this person care so much? Why does a breakup or a goodbye cause such ferocity? But this is the key. You are not seeing the reaction to just the event of leaving. You are seeing the breaking down of their created identity. That is why it feels like the end of the world to them. Your goodbye is not one person leaving another in their mind. It is the collapse of their world. And if you have ever been on the receiving end of this, you know how confusing it can be. The strength of their rage can make you doubt yourself, wondering if perhaps you really are the bad person they claim you are. This is part of the trap. Their fury is not just emotional, it is planned. It is meant to pull you back in to set up the old way of acting where you react. And they are dominant. That is why holding your ground in the face of narcissistic rage is so hard and yet so important. What you must realize is that their anger is not truly about you, it is about them. It is about the emptiness inside them that your absence reveals. They push that emptiness onto you, accusing you, blaming you, attacking you, because it is much simpler to do that than to face the void inside. If you can see it for what it is, not as a reflection of your worth, but as a reflection of their weakness, you begin to step outside of their game. And here is something worth thinking about. Rage in this situation is actually a confession. It shows what they try so hard to hide. For all their outward confidence, the narcissist's fury shows you the truth. They are scared. They are scared of being unimportant, scared of being left, scared of facing themselves without someone else to mirror their grand self image. The rage is their mask slipping, their weakness shown the very moment they try hardest to look powerful. This is why the final goodbye changes things so much. When you hold your position in the face of that rage, when you refuse to be tripped back into the cycle, you are not just leaving them, you are facing their deepest fear. And by doing so, you take back something they never wanted you to see: your independence, your strength, your ability to walk away without being consumed. So remember this: their rage is not proof of their power, it is proof of their desperation. And once you see that truth, you no longer have to be caught by it. Narcissistic rage is the sound of a false idea breaking. And when you do not answer it, you prove once and for all that their power over you is finished. When the final goodbye has been spoken and the rage has either exploded or cooled down, narcissists often move into an entirely different phase of behavior, the plan, the attempt to get power back. It is not always clear, and it does not always come as outright anger. Sometimes it is small, sometimes controlling, and sometimes wrapped in emotional talk. But the main reason is the same: to pull you back into their world. What you need to understand is that narcissists do not see relationships as a fair trade of love and respect. They see them as deals of power, a game of being in charge, where their feeling of importance is always fed by your attention, your energy, and your willingness to obey. When you leave, you take away that source from them, and it creates what experts call a narcissistic injury. That injury cannot be tolerated, so their mind starts forming plans to undo it. This is why so many people who finally say goodbye are shocked to find that the narcissist does not always vanish into the night, but instead shows up with new tricks meant to draw them back in. One of the most common plans is what has been called hoovering, named after the vacuum cleaner. They try to suck you back into the relationship by any means needed. Sometimes it is through kindness, suddenly becoming the caring, charming person you once fell for. Other times it is through guilt, reminding you of the past you share, appealing to your sense of pity, or showing themselves as broken and in need of saving. And when those do not work, they might change the method using threats or fear, or painting you as cruel and heartless. All these are different sides of the same plan. Power must be brought back, and you are the only one who can give it. Now, here is what is interesting to think about. In moments like these, you are actually seeing the weakness of the narcissist's so-called power. If their power were real, they would not need to trick you. True strength stands alone. It does not have to fool, guilt, or force others into staying. What you see in these tries is not strength, but dependence masked as dominance. They need you far more than you need them. And that realization is exactly what they fear. From a psychological point of view, this cycle shows the emptiness at the heart of the narcissist's identity. When they try to win you back, it is not because they have had a sudden insight or because they have suddenly learned how to love. It is because your leaving is a mirror they cannot bear to face. It reflects back their lack of ability, their failure to hold on to something real. By reeling you back in, they can cover over that truth, at least for a while. And here's where the empathetic or the deeply self-aware person has to be careful. Compassion is both a strength and a weakness. When a narcissist comes back in a moment of seeming modesty or need, it can wake up the empath urge to care, to heal, to forgive. But this is where wisdom must come with compassion. Because without wisdom, compassion becomes a rope that drags you back into the very cycle you worked so hard to escape. You have to ask yourself, is this a real change or is this a performance? And in most cases, when you watch carefully, you realize it is the latter. because real change takes time, humility, and effort. It requires the narcissist to face their own flaws, their own shadow, and that is precisely what they have spent their entire life avoiding. What you're more likely seeing is not transformation, but desperation. A desperate attempt to cover up the wound your goodbye caused. There is also another layer we're thinking about. When the narcissist tries to reel you back in, they're not simply trying to recover a relationship, they're trying to change the ending. A final goodbye is a form of closing, and closing is power. It says, this is done, this is settled, and I choose to walk away. For the narcissist, closing is unbearable because it acts away their chance to keep the game going. If they can pull you back, even for a moment, they get to change the story. They get to say, see, you did not really leave. I still matter. I still control the script. That is why the biggest act of strength in these moments is not to respond, not to explain, not to open the door again. Because every word you give them, every bit of attention is another chance for them to twist the story in their favor. Quietness in this sense is not weakness. It is the purest type of power. So when you find yourself facing the narcissist tries to reel you back in, remember what is truly at risk. It is not about them meeting you. It is about them needing to avoid themselves. And if you fall back into the cycle, you give them that escape. But if you stand firm, if you let the goodbye remain the goodbye, you force them to face the very thing they have always run from. The emptiness of their own reflection. Their tries to reel you back in are not proof of their love. They are proof of their dependence. And the greatest victory comes when you see that dependence for what it is and refuse to let it pull you under again. Once a narcissist realizes that their tries to pull you back in have failed, when the charm, the guilt, and the threats all fall flat, they often turn to one of the most damaging plans in their toolkit, the smear campaign. This is the stage where they try to rewrite the story. Not for you, because you have already refused to play the role they gave you, but for everyone else who might listen. The smear campaign is their way of getting power back by controlling the story. Why do they do this? Because narcissists cannot stand to be seen as the one who was left. To them, losing someone is not just a personal hit. It is a public shame. And shame for the narcissist is unbearable. Remember, their whole sense of self is built on keeping up an image of being better, charming, or powerful. When you leave, you expose them as weak, flawed, and human. That exposure is intolerable. So they fight it not by facing reality, but by building a different reality. They paint you as the villain, the abuser, the unstable one. They do this not just to protect their standing in the eyes of others, but also to protect themselves from the truth about who they are. The smear campaign is sneaky because it depends on one of the most basic parts of human nature, our wish to be understood. Most people, when falsely accused, want to defend themselves. They want to explain to prove that they are not what they are being accused of. But here's where the narcissist has the upper hand. They know that the more you try to defend yourself, the more you get tangled in the very story they have made. It becomes a trap. You spend energy fighting lies while they sit back and watch as the drama itself confirms their story. See, they say, look how emotional, how unstable, how obsessed this person is. To think about it simply, this shows something deep about how tricks work. Lies do not need to be true to be effective. They only need to be repeated, believed by a few, and used to create doubt. A narcissist knows this without being told. They are not worried about truth. They are worried about how they are seen. And how they are seen in their world is everything. If they can convince others that you are the problem, they bring back their sense of power, even if only in their own minds. From a psychological view, this is blaming others for their own faults in its purest form. Everything they fear about themselves being controlling, cruel, dishonest, they put onto you. And by doing so, they create a twisted mirror where they remain the hero and you become the monster. This lets them keep the false idea of being better while avoiding the pain of taking responsibility. Now, if you have ever been the target of such a plan, you know how painful it can be. It is not just the loss of the relationship that hurts, but the feeling of being wrongly described, of watching people you care about turn cold because they have been fed a false story. It can feel like a second betrayal, one that wounds your very sense of who you are. But this is where strength must rise above reaction. The best way to deal with a smear campaign is not to fight fire with fire, but to stand firmly in your truth. That does not mean you stay silent in the face of every lie, but it does mean you do not allow yourself to be pulled into the theater narcissist has built over time. Being constant speaks louder than accusations. People who truly know you, who watch your actions and your character, will see through the twisted claims. And those who do not, those who easily believe the narcissist story, show more about themselves than they do about you. It is here that we learn a deeper lesson about human resilience. The narcissist smear campaign shows not just their desperation, but also the weakness of your own need for outside approval. When you learn to stand secure in who you are without depending on what others think or say, you take away one of the most powerful weapons. Because what is a lie worth if it cannot cause a reaction? What is gossip worth if you refuse to let it define you? In the end, the smear campaign is less about you and more about their failure to deal with the truth. It is their way of screaming into the emptiness, insisting that the world believe their version of events because the other choice, the reality that they were left, that their mask slipped, is simply too much for them to bear. After the rages burst out, after the tries to pull you back in have failed, and even after the smear campaign has finished its run, there's often a quieter, more sneaky stage that follows. The narcissist slides into feeling sorry for themselves and playing the victim. At first glance, it may look like regret. It may even sound like taking responsibility. They will say things like, I do not know why everyone leaves me, or no one ever really understands me. To the person who does not know, it can sound like real emotion. But what it really is more often than not is another way of controlling a final attempt to save some amount of power by making themselves the sad figure. Why does this happen? Because after all, the outside plans fail. Anger, charm, threats, twisted talk. The narcissist is left with one tool that often works on empathetic people. Guilt. They know that if they can make you feel sorry for them, if they can place themselves as the hurt soul who has been left, they may still pull at your compassion. It is an appeal not to sense but to the heart. And for many people, especially those who naturally feel for others, this is the hardest trap to avoid. But here's the thing, self-pity when used as a weapon by a narcissist is not the same thing as real vulnerability. Real vulnerability involves honesty, modesty, and the willingness to face one's flaws. It is open and self-aware. Narcissistic self-pity, in contrast, is self-focused. It is not about facing truth. It is about avoiding it. Instead of saying, I hurt you and I need to understand why I do this, they say, everyone betrays me, everyone leaves me. The small difference, one statement takes responsibility, the other moves it away. This change into victimhood serves many purposes. It lets the narcissist protect their ego by avoiding accountability. If they are the victim, then they do not have to face the shame of being the cause of the breakup. It also helps them keep an image in the eyes of others. People who do not know the full story might feel sympathy rushing in to comfort them, offering the attention and praise they have lost from you. And perhaps most importantly, it gives them a story they can live with. Because to admit that you left them because of their actions would require them to face the very thing they have built their entire life avoiding, the truth of their own brokenness. From a psychological view, this is where blaming and denial meet. The narcissist pushes blame outward onto you, onto life, onto bad luck, while at the same time denying any inner responsibility. It is an emotional trick, and it works surprisingly well on people who are wired for empathy because our instinct when we see someone hurting is to lessen that pain. What the narcissist has found is that if they can convincingly play the role of the sufferer, they can keep people around them, even if only out of pity. But here is where the thinking part comes in. Real compassion, as hard as this may sound, sometimes means refusing to take part in someone's self destruction. If you allow yourself to be pulled back in by false shows of self pity, you do not actually help the narcissist. You enable them, you make stronger the very patterns that keep them trapped in their false ideas. And at the same time, you lose yourself in the process because you give up your hard won freedom for the sake of an emotional performance that was never about truth in the first place. The challenge then is to tell the difference between real vulnerability and controlling victimhood. That requires both bravery and clarity. It means asking yourself, is this person truly taking responsibility, or are they merely seeking sympathy? Are they opening themselves to growth, or are they holding on to their false ideas by hiring me as their caretaker? These are not easy questions to ask because the narcissist is skilled at blurring the lines. Once you see the pattern, it becomes impossible to ignore. And what you come to realize is this: their victimhood is not proof of their innocence. It is proof of their refusal to face reality. They would rather live as a constant victim than face the shame of taking responsibility. And in that choice, they show the very core of narcissism itself, a constant avoidance of truth, no matter how much pain it causes them or others. So when you see this stage, you must remember that your compassion is a gift, not a rope. You do not owe it to someone who only uses it to keep up cycles of harm. Real strength is the ability to hold your compassion without giving up your clarity. And real freedom comes when you can look at their self pity, recognize it for what it is, and refuse to be tied down by it. When all the other methods fail, the anger, the charm, the smear campaigns, the self pity, there comes a final stage that is, in many ways, the most troubling. The narcissist pulls back into what you might call a hollowed out kind of acceptance. It is not real acceptance. Not in the way a healthy person learns to recognize loss and bring it into their life with a sense of meaning. Rather, it is a kind of defensive retreat, a quiet sulking that hides the unresolved confusion underneath. On the surface, it may look like they have finally let go. But beneath that outer layer is neither peace nor growth. It is simply tiredness, a temporary retreat that comes not from wisdom but from defeat. Now, it is important to make a difference here. Acceptance is not the same as transformation. When a person truly accepts the end of a relationship, they grieve, they think, and if they are honest with themselves, they grow. There is humility in that process. And humility is what allows meaning to come out of suffering. The narcissist, however, avoids humility. Their acceptance is not rooted in, say, ill-awareness, but in self-protection. They give up not because they see the truth, but because every other plan has failed them. It is the collapse of the performance, not the beginning of insight. Thinking about it simply, you could argue that this is where the sadness of narcissism becomes most obvious. Human beings are wired to adapt. We fall, we stumble, but we can learn. We can use pain as a spark for becoming more than we were. But narcissism cuts that process short because the ego is too weak to bear the weight of accountability. The narcissist cannot turn their suffering into wisdom. So, what do instead? They settle into a story of uselessness. They tell themselves the game was not worth playing anyway, or that you were not worth the effort, or that life is simply cruel and set against them. In doing so, they numb themselves against the pain of reality, but they also blot the chance of growth. This stage then is strange. On the one hand, it can appear as though you have finally found peace. The narcissist is quiet, withdrawn, no longer shouting accusations or making dramas around your name. But on the other hand, it is not real closing. It is more like a performance of closing put on for the sake of saving face, both in front of others and within the private show of their own mind. That difference matters because when you understand that, you stop waiting for their quietness to mean something it does not. You stop confusing their acceptance with reconciliation. And here's where the real challenge lies for you: not mistaking their apparent calm for a sign that everything is finally solved. The narcissist's quietness is not peace, it is being dormant. It is an emotional pause that lasts only as long as they see no chance to get power back. If a new opportunity comes up, a way to hurt you, to pull you back in, or to take back some type of dominance, they will often grab it without thinking twice. Their acceptance, in other words, is not the end of the story. It is just a break. What do you do with that knowledge? You recognize that true closing does not come from them. It comes from you. It comes from refusing to put your feeling of resolution in the hands of someone who has spent their life running from truth. The responsibility, as heavy as it may feel, is to create meaning for yourself after the destruction, to look at what happened, to take out the lessons, to face the pain honestly, and to move forward in a way that they cannot. That is what makes you different from them. That is what changes the ending into something more than despair. If you are waiting for the narcissist to meet you in that place of mutual reflection, you will wait forever. Their acceptance will always be hollow because it is never about the truth. It is about keeping up the self-image. But your acceptance, if you choose it, can be different. It can be rooted in clarity, in the decision not to play the game anymore. Not because you have been beaten, but because you have grown past it. That is the difference between living in denial and living in truth. And that brings us to the key point. The game is truly over when you stop needing their closure and begin creating your own. When you no longer mistake their quietness for wisdom, when you no longer confuse their withdrawal with peace, you step into a deeper kind of freedom. It is the freedom that comes from recognizing that the narcissist's acceptance is just another mask and you do not need to play along with it anymore.